Picture this, you are running. Not for sport, not for leisure, but for your very soul. The air burns in your lungs, each breath a shard of glass. And the only thing you hear over the frantic drumming of your own heart is the sound of a child's terrified whimpers. This is Alara's world. A world shrunk to the size of the small, trembling hand she holds in her own, and the vast, unforgiving darkness that threatens to swallow them both whole. Behind them lies the town of redemption, a place whose name was a cruel joke, a gilded cage ruled by a man who believed he owned everything and everyone within it.
Mayor Torne.
A man whose touch was a brand, whose voice was a shackle. For years, Alara had been his possession, her life a litany of silent screams in a soundproof room. The townspeople saw a well-kept woman, the mayor's wife, but they never saw the bruises hidden by silk, or the slow death of the spirit in her eyes. They never counted the violations, the endless nights that felt like 100 lifetimes of torment, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of her hope. She had been told she would never heal, that she was broken beyond repair. And for a long time she believed it. Until tonight, the sliver of a mother's fierce, desperate love finally cracked the stone of her despair. She looked at her daughter, Lily, a 5-year-old girl who was beginning to learn the language of fear, and she knew she would rather die in the wilderness than let that fear take root in her child's heart. So she ran. With nothing but the clothes on their backs and a satchel containing a loaf of bread, a canteen of water, and a small wooden bird Lily could not sleep without, they fled into the teeth of an oncoming storm. The sky, a canvas of bruised purple and angry gray, mirrored the tempest in her soul. The wind howled like a predator, tearing at her thin dress and whipping her hair across her face. Rain began to fall, first as cold, hesitant drops, then as a torrential downpour that turned the dusty trail into a slick river of mud. Every flash of lightning felt like a searchlight from the town, every roll of thunder the sound of Thorne's men on horseback. Alara's mind was a maelstrom of terror. She imagined Thorne's face, the smug twist of his lips, the cold fire in his eyes when he discovered she was gone. He would not see it as an escape. He would see it as theft. She had stolen his property. She had stolen his daughter. He would hunt them, not with the swiftness of justice, but with the slow, cruel certainty of a man who enjoys the chase. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the ground in front of her, on the next step and the next. Lily stumbled, her small legs unable to keep up. "Mama, I'm tired," she cried, her voice barely audible over the storm. Alara swept her up into her arms without breaking stride, the child's weight a familiar, aching burden that was also her only source of strength. "I know, my love. We just have to be brave for a little while longer," Alara whispered, her words lost to the gale. She didn't know where she was going, only that it was away. Away from the manicured streets and polite facades of redemption. Away from the silent judgment of the townsfolk who chose comfort over conscience. She ran deeper into the Badlands, a harsh, unforgiving landscape of rock and thorn that promised no sanctuary, only a different kind of peril. Hours bled into one another. The initial surge of adrenaline gave way to a bone-deep exhaustion that was almost hypnotic. Her muscles screamed, her feet were raw, and the cold had seeped into her very marrow. Lily had fallen into a fitful, shivering sleep against her shoulder. Alara's vision began to blur. The jagged rocks and skeletal trees swam before her eyes. She stumbled, catching herself, then stumbled again. Finally, her body gave out. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the muddy ground, curling her body around Lily's in a last, instinctual act of protection. The rain beat down on her back. The world was cold and loud and violent. As her consciousness began to fade, a single thought echoed in the ruins of her mind. This is how it ends. At least she was free. Her eyes stared sightless at the burning sky as the darkness finally claimed her. Consciousness returned not as a sudden jolt, but as a slow, gentle tide. The first thing Alara registered was warmth. A deep, penetrating warmth that seemed to be pulling the chill from her bones. The second was silence. The storm's fury was gone, replaced by the soft, rhythmic crackle of a fire. She tried to open her eyes, but her lids were heavy as lead. A wave of panic seized her. Lily. Where was Lily? A small, desperate sound escaped her throat. A moment later, she felt a hand, large and calloused, touch her forehead. It wasn't Thorn's hand. Thorn's touch was proprietary, cold even when it feigned warmth. This hand was different. It was steady, hesitant, and it retreated the instant she flinched. "Easy now," a voice said. It was low and raspy, like stones rubbing together. "The little one's safe. She's sleeping," that was all he said. The simple, unadorned statement was more calming than 1,000 reassurances would have been. Alara forced her eyes open. She was lying on a simple cot, covered by a thick wool blanket. A fire blazed in a stone hearth across the room, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn log walls of a small cabin. And sitting in a wooden chair near the fire, watching her, was a man. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his worn shirt. His face was weathered, carved by sun and wind, and a faint scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, giving his expression a permanent, somber cast. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no malice, only a deep, abiding weariness. He looked like a man who had made peace with solitude. This was Silas. He saw the fear that immediately flooded her eyes, the way her body tensed, preparing for a blow that was not coming. He simply nodded, then rose and walked over to a small bed in the corner. There, tucked under another pile of blankets, was Lily, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. Her wooden bird was clutched in her hand. The sight of her, safe and warm, was enough to break the dam of Alara's terror. A sob caught in her throat. Silas didn't move closer. He didn't speak. He just stood there, giving her the space to breathe, to see, to understand that, for this moment at least, the hunt was over. "You were half frozen," he said, his voice still quiet. "Found you and the girl at the edge of my property." He gestured to a pot simmering over the fire. "There's broth." It wasn't a question or a command, just a statement of fact. Alara slowly, painfully, pushed herself into a sitting position. Every muscle ached in protest. She looked down at herself. Someone had removed her soaked and muddy dress. She was wearing a man's flannel shirt that was far too large for her, its sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The panic returned, cold and sharp. She clutched the blanket to her chest, her knuckles white. Silas saw the direction of her gaze and seemed to understand immediately. His own gaze dropped to the floorboards, a faint flush rising on his weathered cheeks. "Your dress was torn and soaked through. You would have taken a fever," he explained, his voice even quieter than before. I left it to dry by the fire. I didn't. I kept my back turned." The earnestness in his tone, the sheer awkwardness of the admission, was so contrary to the brutal confidence of Thorn that Alara felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion, the barest flicker of trust. He was a stranger, a solitary man in the middle of nowhere, yet he had shown her more decency in a few hours than she had known in years. The days that followed unfolded in a quiet, fragile rhythm. Silas never asked her name, nor where she had come from. He never asked about the haunted look in her eyes or the way she flinched from any sudden movement. He simply existed alongside them, a silent, steady presence. He would leave bowls of stew or fresh bread on the small wooden table and then retreat outside to chop wood or mend a fence, giving her and Lily the illusion of being alone. He spoke only when necessary, his words carefully chosen and direct. Alara, in turn, remained a ghost in his home, moving silently from the cot to the chair by the fire, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. The trauma she carried was a physical thing, a constant tension in her shoulders, a knot of ice in her stomach. She expected the other shoe to drop, for this kindness to be revealed as a trick, a prelude to some new horror. But the horror never came. Instead, there was only the quiet cowboy and his quiet cabin. It was Lily who began to bridge the chasm of silence between them. One afternoon, she approached Silas as he was carving a piece of wood on the porch. She held up her little wooden bird, whose wing had been chipped during their escape. "It's broken," she said, her lower lip trembling. Alara tensed, ready to pull her daughter back, but Silas simply stopped his work. He looked at the bird, then at Lily's worried face. He took the toy with a gentleness that seemed almost unnatural for his large, calloused hands. He didn't say a word. He just took out a smaller knife and, with a few deft, careful movements, smoothed the broken wing until it was whole again. He handed it back to her. Lily's face lit up with a brilliant smile. "Thank you, mister," she chirped, before running back to Alara. From his seat on the porch, Silas watched them, and for the first time, Alara saw the profound sadness behind his stoic mask. It was the look of a man who was intimately familiar with loss. Slowly, cautiously, Alara began to emerge from her shell. She started by tidying the small cabin, a space that was neat but Spartan, clearly the home of someone who expected nothing from life and so asked for nothing. She found a small, neglected vegetable patch behind the cabin and began to tend to it, pulling weeds and watering the thirsty plants. The simple act of nurturing something, of bringing life from the dry soil, felt like an act of defiance. She was healing the garden, and in some small way it was healing her. One evening, as Silas returned from checking his trap lines, he found a bowl of hot stew waiting for him, made with vegetables from the patch she had revived. She had used the last of the bread to make dumplings. It was a simple meal, but it was an offering. "Thank you." He looked at the stew, then at her. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and sat down to eat. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the silence of fear and uncertainty, but something softer, more companionable. "My name is Alara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And this is Lily." Silas stopped eating for a moment. He looked at her, his gaze direct. "Silas," he replied, and that was all. But a name was a powerful thing. It was an acknowledgement. It meant they were no longer just a stranger and his refugees, but two people sharing a space, a meal, a moment of peace. The next day, he found her struggling to lift a heavy log for the woodpile. He walked over not to take the log from her, but to show her the proper way to use a lever and fulcrum to move it with less effort. He explained the physics of it in his simple, direct way. As he guided her hands, his fingers brushed against hers. She flinched, pulling back instantly, her breath catching in her throat. The familiar chill of panic washed over her. Silas immediately stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and laced with a self-reproach that was utterly genuine. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful understanding. "I won't. I will be careful." He didn't use the word gentle, but the promise was there, hanging in the air between them. A promise to be careful with her space, with her fear, with the invisible wounds he could so clearly see. He was promising to be a gentle man in a world that had shown her only brutality. And in that moment, watching this quiet cowboy who asked for nothing and offered everything, Alara felt a crack in the ice that had encased her heart for so long. It was the first, terrifying, and hopeful glimmer of a thaw. The fragile peace of the cabin was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats. It was a hot, still afternoon, the kind where the air itself seems to be holding its breath. Alara was teaching Lily how to identify wildflowers near the edge of the woods when the sound reached them, distant but unmistakable. It was a rider coming fast. Instinct took over. Alara grabbed Lily and scrambled back towards the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shoved Lily behind her as she peered through a crack in the door. A man on a fine-looking horse reined in a short distance from the cabin. He wore the dusty clothes of a traveler, but he sat in the saddle with an air of authority. He was one of Thorne's deputies. She recognized him instantly. Silas emerged from the barn, holding a bridle in his hand, his movements calm and unhurried. He positioned himself between the rider and the cabin, a silent, immovable wall. "Looking for something?" Silas asked, his tone flat. The deputy's eyes scanned the property, lingering on the cabin. "Mayor Thorne's wife and daughter ran off a few weeks back," the man said. his voice dripping with casual arrogance. "A woman and a little girl. You seen anyone like that pass through here?" Alara held her breath, her hand pressed over Lily's mouth. This was it. The sanctuary was an illusion. Silas didn't even glance towards the cabin. He just shook his head slowly. "Just me out here," he said, his voice betraying nothing. "Haven't seen a soul in months." The deputy squinted, his gaze sharp and suspicious. He looked at the small vegetable patch, healthier than it should be for a man living alone. He looked at the faint wisp of smoke curling from the chimney. "Funny," he said. "Could have sworn I heard a child's laugh on the wind." Silas met his gaze without flinching. "Wind plays tricks in these canyons. Makes you hear all sorts of things that ain't there." There was a long, tense silence. The deputy weighed Silas's words, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Finally, with a dismissive shrug, he wheeled his horse around. "If you do sem, there's a handsome reward. The mayor misses his family." The way he said "Mrs." was laced with menace. He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As soon as he was gone, Alara sank to the floor, her body trembling uncontrollably. The brief illusion of safety had been torn away, revealing the terrifying reality of her situation. They were not safe. They would never be safe as long as Thorn was looking for them. Lily began to cry, sensing her mother's terror. Silas came inside, his face grim. He knelt in front of Alara, not touching her, but his presence was a shield. "He's gone," he said softly. "You're safe." But she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she choked out. "He'll send more. He'll keep looking until he finds us. You don't understand what he's like." The dam finally broke. The story she had held locked inside her for years came pouring out in a torrent of pain and shame. She told him everything. About the gilded cage of her marriage to Mayor Thorn, a man beloved by the public and a monster in private. She spoke of his possessiveness, his cruelty, the way he treated her and Lily as objects, as reflections of his own power. She didn't use the word rape, but she described the endless nights of forced submission, the cold, methodical way he took what he believed was his right, over and over, until her spirit felt as bruised and broken as her body. She described it as a living death, 100 violations, 1,000 tiny surrenders that had eroded her soul until almost nothing was left. "He told me I was his," she whispered, her voice raw with remembered horror, "that I belonged to him, and if I ever tried to leave, he would hunt me down and drag me back, and he would make me wish I had never been born." She finally looked up at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "He will not stop." Silas listened to the entire story without interruption. His face, already somber, seemed to harden into granite. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a cold, dangerous fire. He had seen this kind of evil before. It was the same lawless tyranny that had taken everything from him. When she was finished, the cabin was silent save for her ragged breaths. He looked at Alara, at the raw terror and profound suffering etched on her face. Then he looked at Lily, who was huddled against her mother, her small face streaked with tears. Something shifted within him. The solitary man, the man who had retreated from the world to nurse his own wounds, was gone. In his place stood a protector. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. He gently rested his hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm, steady, and utterly devoid of threat. It was a touch that anchored her. "He will not touch you again," Silas said, his voice low but filled with an iron certainty that resonated deep in her bones. "This is your home now, you and Lily. I will not let him take you from it." For the first time, he offered a piece of his own shattered past. "Years ago," he began, his gaze distant, "men like Thorn came to my homestead. They wanted my land. I tried to fight them with the law. They answered with fire." His voice cracked, just for a second. "I lost my wife, my son. I failed to protect them. I will not fail again." It was a vow, a solemn promise made by a broken man to a broken woman. It was a declaration of war. They both knew Thorn would be back, and not with a single rider asking questions. He would come with force, intent on reclaiming his property and punishing those who had defied him. The sanctuary was about to become a fortress. The quiet cowboy was about to stand against the storm. The days that followed were thick with a new kind of tension. It was not the passive fear of being hunted, but the active, focused anxiety of preparing for a battle. The quiet companionship of the cabin was replaced by a shared, unspoken purpose. Silas began to fortify their small haven, his movements economical and precise. He boarded up the smaller windows, leaving only narrow slits for observation. He reinforced the door with a heavy iron bar he forged in his small smithy. He wasn't building a fortress to withstand an army, but a shelter to outlast a siege of will. He showed Alara how to load and fire an old rifle, his hands guiding hers with the same careful respect he had shown before. She hated the feel of the cold, heavy weapon, a symbol of the violence she had fled, but she understood its necessity. The weight of it in her hands was a grim reminder that peace was not a gift, but something that now had to be defended. He also prepared for fire. He cleared a wide perimeter around the cabin, removing dry brush and grass. He filled every bucket and barrel with water from the creek, stationing them at the corners of the small building. He was a man preparing to fight the devil he knew. During these preparations, a new dynamic formed between them. They worked as a team, their shared goal forging a bond stronger than words. Alara found a strength she never knew she possessed. She was no longer just a victim fleeing her past. She was a defender of her future. She worked alongside Silas, her fear slowly being burned away by the heat of her resolve. She would not be dragged back into the dark. Not now. Not ever. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red, Silas found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the canyons. Lily was asleep inside. The world was quiet, but it was the heavy silence before a battle. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I've been afraid every day for 5 years," she answered, her voice steady. "I'm tired of being afraid. Now, I'm just angry," he nodded, understanding completely. He sat on the step below her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel his steady presence. He didn't offer empty platitudes or promises that everything would be all right. He simply shared the silence with her, a silent acknowledgement of the coming storm. "Thorn thinks because he has power and money, he can own people," Alara said, more to herself than to him. "He doesn't understand that you can't own a person's soul." Silas looked at the rifle leaning against the wall. "Men like him only understand one language," he said grimly. "But we're not going to speak his language," Alara replied, surprising him. "We're not going to become like him to defeat him. We're going to survive him. You, me, and Lily. That is how we win." In that moment, Silas saw her not as a fragile woman he needed to protect, but as a warrior in her own right, one whose strength was forged in suffering and tempered by love. His desire to protect her was now mingled with a profound respect. The attack came at dawn. A faint glow was just beginning to silhouette the jagged peaks of the canyons when the sound began, the rhythmic thunder of a dozen horses approaching at speed. Silas was already awake, standing by one of the viewing slits, the rifle in his hands. "They're here," he said, his voice calm. Alara, who had been dozing in a chair, was instantly on her feet. She checked on Lily, still sleeping soundly, and then took her position by the other window, her own rifle feeling impossibly heavy. The riders fanned out, surrounding the cabin. At their head was Mayor Thorn, his face a mask of cold fury. He was dressed impeccably, as if for a town meeting, a stark contrast to the rugged men who flanked him. "Alara," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the morning stillness. "This foolishness has gone on long enough. Come out now. Bring my daughter. I am a reasonable man. I am willing to forgive this." Lapse in judgment, Alara flinched at the sound of his voice, the old fear coiling in her stomach. But then she looked at Silas's determined profile, and her own resolve hardened. She would not answer him. She would not give him the satisfaction. "She's not coming out, Thorn," Silas shouted back, his voice a low growl. "She's not your property. Leave this place and never return." Thorn let out a short, incredulous laugh. "And who are you?" "Some backwoods savage who thinks he can steal what is mine." He dismounted, his movements arrogant and confident. "I own this valley. I own the law in this valley. You are harboring a thief and a runaway. I have every right to be here." He gestured to his men. "We can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. The choice is yours." The hard way began moments later. Thorn's men tried to rush the door, using a heavy log as a battering ram. The reinforced bar held. A shot rang out from the cabin, Silas firing into the dirt in front of the men. A warning. They scrambled back. Thorn's face darkened with rage. He had expected a quick and easy resolution. He had expected fear and surrender. He was not getting it. "You want to hide in your wooden box?" he screamed, his composure finally cracking. "Fine. We'll burn you out of it." He ordered his men to gather brush and pile it against the cabin walls. This was the moment Silas had prepared for. As Thorn's men were distracted, he slipped out a small, hidden escape hatch at the back of the cabin. He moved like a phantom through the rocks and shadows he knew so well, circling around behind the attackers. Alara, meanwhile, watched in horror as the men began to light torches. The smell of smoke filled the air. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but the sound of Lily stirring in her sleep grounded her. She had to be strong. She had to trust Silas. Just as Thorn was about to give the order to set the cabin ablaze, a piercing whistle echoed from the cliffs above them. Everyone looked up. There, standing on a high ledge, was Silas. He held a lit bundle of oil-soaked rags. Below him, precariously balanced, was a massive pile of rocks and deadfall, a natural rockslide waiting for a trigger. "Thorn!" he yelled. "Call them off." Thorn stared up at him, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Silas replied, holding the flame closer to a fuse he had laid. "This whole canyon side will come down. It'll block the only pass out of here for a month. Your horses will be useless. You'll be trapped suddenly." Thorn was not the master of the situation. He was in Silas's territory, playing by Silas's rules. As Thorn hesitated, another sound drifted up the canyon. The distinct sound of a wagon, and more than one rider, coming up the main trail. A circuit judge was due to pass through the region, a fact Silas had known and counted on. Thorn's plan to quietly and violently reclaim his property was about to have an audience. The judge and his marshal, drawn by the sight of armed men surrounding a cabin, rode into the clearing. Their faces were grim. "What in heaven's name is going on here, Mayor Thorn?" the judge demanded, his voice booming with authority. Thorn was trapped. His legal authority was a sham, his power derived from isolation and intimidation. Before the impartial face of the law, he was just a man attempting to burn a woman and child out of their home. His men, seeing the marshal, lost their nerve. They were hired thugs, not men willing to face a federal judge. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Thorn, sputtering, tried to explain, but his lies sounded hollow and desperate in the clear morning light. The judge listened, then looked at the terrified woman peering from the cabin window, and at the grim-faced man on the cliff above. He had seen enough. Thorn's reign was over. His power, built on fear, crumbled to dust the moment it was exposed to the light. Months later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow over the small cabin. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the aspen trees had turned a brilliant yellow. The world felt clean, reborn. Alara sat on the porch steps, watching Lily chase butterflies in the meadow. The fear was gone from her daughter's eyes, replaced by the pure, unadulterated joy of childhood. Alara herself felt quiet. The constant storm inside her had passed, leaving behind a deep, peaceful calm. The scars were still there, invisible wounds on her soul, but they no longer ached with constant pain. They were a part of her story, a reminder of the battle she had fought and won. Silas came and sat beside her, handing her a cup of warm cider. He moved with an easy grace now, the crushing weight of his own past having lifted slightly. In saving her, he had also saved a part of himself. They didn't need to speak. Their shared silence was a language of its own, filled with gratitude, respect, and a deep, burgeoning affection. He had kept his promise. He had been gentle not just in his actions, but with her heart. He had given her the time and space to heal, and in doing so had created a home where she had once believed none could ever exist. They were not a conventional family, but they were a family nonetheless. 3 broken souls who had found a way to piece themselves back together, creating something new and whole. A found family, born not of blood, but of shared survival and quiet love. The quiet cowboy had not only saved her from the monster, he had shown her that she could save herself. What does it truly mean to heal? Is it the forgetting of a wound, or the acceptance of the scar? Can a spirit that has been systematically broken ever truly be made whole again? Or does it simply learn to live with the cracks? The story of Alara and Silas suggests that healing is not a destination, but a journey. It is not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let the past have power over the future. It is a quiet, patient process, often requiring the gentle hand of another to help guide the way. It is the slow rebuilding of trust, one small act of kindness at a time. If you believe in the power of compassion to mend the deepest of wounds, and in the strength of the human spirit to rise from the ashes of despair, show your support for stories like this. Let us know your thoughts on Alara's journey in the comments below. Like this video if it moved you, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of human connection.